The first and most common roadblock that I'm going to guess for most home gardeners trying to make their own hot compost is a lack of nitrogen. It's really easy to underestimate how much nitrogen it takes to counterbalance carbon material. Carbons don't really break down on their own very fast. They need nitrogen. And of course, by they, I'm referring to the microorganisms in the carbon materials. Anytime that I have tried skimping on my nitrogen additions to a compost pile, I've regretted it. Now, of course, you can also go a little bit overboard on the nitrogen, but I think that's far less likely to happen. And I think that the main reason not enough nitrogen is an issue is because, on the flip side, carbon is very easy to source and store, whereas nitrogen is harder to come by and has a shelf life. What I mean by that is that if you take comfrey leaves and add them to a compost pile fresh, like within a few hours of cutting, the nitrogen content in those comfrey leaves will be very high. However, if you were to spread comfrey leaves across the soil and leave them for a week, you'd very quickly see them turn brown and become crumbly, especially if the sun is beating down on them. So what's happening there? Well, at a certain level, plants are alive for a little while after being harvested. A little morbid, but technically true. And while they're alive, they've still got nitrogen in them. And that's my super simplified way of explaining it. Really, what you need to know is that you can't cut your grass hoping to stockpile on nitrogen until you're ready to build a full-sized pile, which means that you need a lot all at once. And you might be asking, does that mean that we're losing all the nitrogen once the pile starts heating up? And the answer there is yes and no. The plant material is losing nitrogen, but it's mostly retained inside of the microbes' bodies, which means that it's kind of locked into a stable state. Once the microbes get into the soil, eventually they'll pass on to the next life and leave their bodies behind to re-impart that nitrogen to the soil, or they'll give it to the plants. Of course, with hot compost piles, you'll lose some amount of nitrogen to off-gassing. In a pile that gets too hot, you're obviously going to be losing a lot more nitrogen. One way to partially mitigate this, by the way, would be to add a thin layer of charcoal to the top of your pile. I usually do this if I've got some extra on hand, and doing that helps capture some of that off-gassing nitrogen because the charcoal absorbs it.